don't understand. Why are we here?
You thought giving your life to him would keep me from you?
Director J.D. Allen brings us Algea, God of Pain, also known as simply God of Pain. And this is a strange, quirky, kind of anthology sci-fi horror movie. What's the story? Well, it takes place in the future at some point, and it's like a dystopian future. I think they say it's like 2046 or something like that. And we focus on a series of criminal trials, and they're all kind of killers of one sort or another, and they get sentenced to the same fate. And that is they're taken to this kind of chamber where they have an injection in their eye, and then depending on how you look at it, their kind of souls are transported to a living nightmare, a hellish dimension of their own design, or potentially they are trapped in a kind of psychological prison in their own mind. Either way, in both cases they meet the God of Pain, a character with a mask literally directly from the Temu website, is there to judge them and punish them for their crimes. So let's talk about it. What works in this movie? So it is a low budget movie, but I will say the production design here is quite impressive considering the clear low budget nature of this movie. These hell dimensions are kind of warped realities that these kind of characters have known, and there's kind of strange imagery, weird kind of like characters walking around, you know, things where they shouldn't be and stuff like that. So it's all very kind of disconcerting, and I think the movie does do a good job of making you have this kind of sense of, you know, the familiar, but it's not quite right. You know, there's kind of children silently playing with kind of blank expressions on their faces and things like this, and weird sort of set decoration and costuming for sort of odd characters that seem to be walking around. There are some kind of creepier moments, and then we come to the God of Pain himself, and yes, he's wearing a mask directly from Temu, but nonetheless it still looks sort of quite creepy, and he's got these kind of like rubber arms that are sort of like bulbous and kind of weird looking. So it does have a certain uncomfortable kind of unnatural feel to it. The God of Pain character kind of talks like kind of Pennywise as well, so it's you know, he has a kind of a sort of a character in himself, and the way the story is told, you know, we focus on various kind of people who are sentenced to this fate, and then we kind of have flashbacks that kind of see how they got there, and there are some kind of quite kind of violent scenes, and most of these kind of characters are some type of killer of one way or another, like a serial killer and things like that. We do get a couple of variations and things, like one, for example, is a kind of like vigilante, and the way they interact with like the God of Pain, for example, is a little different. And so, you know, there are kind of variations to a degree of kind of the interactions and the fate that these kind of characters kind of might have. But it's a mix of these kind of sequences where they get judged, and then we kind of see this kind of dystopian future sequence. Then we have this kind of interactions in this kind of hellish dimension, and then we have the kind of the backstory showing you the kind of the crime and the bloodshed that could have caused this. And that's basically how all these kind of stories kind of play out. So, you know, it's a kind of a mixture of science fiction, sort of drama, action, and then kind of horror elements as well. And as I say, I think some of the visuals are pretty strong here, and you know, it's certainly somewhat of a striking film in that respect, and it has a sort of weird, surreal, original feel to it to a degree, and you know, it's certainly an interesting movie, certainly visually. The acting is a little mixed, but I do think there are some stronger performances here. As in a case with a lot, large cast, of which this is, but the performances are a mixed bag. But there are a couple here that I think are stronger. The most interesting one for me was the vigilante one, and the other one toward the end of the movie. They had a little bit more to it, I would suggest. So what doesn't work with this movie? I think the main problem here is that it's an anthology movie where each one of the stories are fundamentally more or less the same. It's someone getting convicted of a killing, going to this kind of hellish dimension, having a bit of denial about it, kind of pleading, and then we kind of see the backstory of how they got there, and ultimately it's them killing someone, and then that sort of conversation with the god of pain. And that's kind of it. It's the same sort of thing each time. And, with an anthology movie, typically you would have different stories, maybe with a kind of a through line sometimes. But this is more or less the same story with only slight variations. So it ultimately becomes repetitive and therefore a little dull, which is the main critique here. I mean, when the film first started, I didn't realise it was an anthology, and I thought, well, this is quite an interesting setup, and what's going to kind of happen here? And ultimately, the next one, I'm thinking, is this going to be the same every time? And yeah, it kind of is. And I think there needs to be more variation about what's actually kind of going on. Maybe the God of Pain sort of comes out. It's never really clear about if it's a figment of psychosis, or if there really is this kind of dimension. We know very little about this kind of future society which has decided to subject kind of criminals to this. I mean, how do we get there? We don't know. It all seems quite brutal, Sue, but we're left to a lot of assumptions in this movie. So if you are someone who likes everything kind of wrapped up, this might be a bit frustrating for you. As I've said, I think the acting is a little mixed. There are some stronger performances, but there are also some weaker performances as well. So it does run the whole gambit really of acting range, I would say. The movie is lower budget, and there are instances where it's particularly in the kind of the future sort of sequences where I do feel the budget does show quite a lot. I mean, it does look very cheap in those sequences. I mean, I wonder if they were filmed at sort of different times. I think the kind of the God of Pain sequences, and again, I'll say it again, the mask is one you can literally buy from Temu, so that looks cheap, but it still is relatively kind of well done. But those kind of future sort of sequences, they look a little cheap. It looks like just like a studio. So it is obviously a cheap movie. It is what it is. They can only kind of do obviously the best they can with the budget that they got. But the real crumb of this movie, as I say, is just the sort of repetitiveness that is really at odds with the creativeness of the visuals. I'll give it a 5 out of 10, this movie, because I do think there's certainly some visual panache here, but the storytelling is definitely the weaker side. Have you seen God of Pain? What were your thoughts? Please do let me know, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.